Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where the air itself seems to hold secrets, and you can almost taste the perfume of forgotten promises drifting across the sands. You walk under the heavy sky of a desert dusk, the horizon stained with rose and gold, caravans stretching like a ribbon of shadow. The bells on the camels jingle in slow rhythm, and somewhere in that hypnotic clatter you swear you hear laughter, whispers, maybe even a sigh. The markets of the silk routes glow ahead. Braziers flickering orange, spices stacked in pyramids, and merchants waving you closer with fingers stained saffron yellow. They lean in, lowering their voices to tell you that saffron can do more than season a stew. That musk, carried in a pouch against your skin, can lure a lover faster than coin. It's nonsense, maybe, but it's nonsense people believed so fiercely. They would trade silks, gems, even a horse for a tiny sachet of powder wrapped in cloth. You probably won't survive this kind of marketplace, at least not with your wallet intact. But you can't help drifting deeper, because the scents are pulling you, and the promises are tugging at something you don't want to admit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. I love knowing who else is wide awake when history is at its strangest. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You edge past a stall where a wrinkled old woman crushes rose petals in a mortar, her wrists jingling with bronze bangles. And she looks up at you with eyes so sharp you feel as if she's undressing your soul. She presses a tiny cloth sachet into your palm-powdered cloves, she says, strong enough to keep a lover faithful. You half smile, half scoff, because cloves are just cloves, right? Except then you remember the story of a queen whose lovers swore they could not leave her, as if her bedchamber was perfumed with chains. In Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, there's a tale of a ruler who dusted her body with cinnamon and cloves before taking a lover, insisting it made her touch. Unforgettable. Historians still argue whether it was her power or her perfume that did the trick, but in the candlelit night, the difference hardly mattered. Dot around the corner, a younger merchant displays jars of thick amber resin, sticky as honey, glowing under torchlight. He laughs when you wrinkle your nose, because yes, it smells a bit like sweat and tells you it's musk, the very scent that made poets in Persia lose sleep. He claims one drop behind the ear could send even the most chaste monk racing to your side. A wild boast, sure, but then again, desire never needed much proof. One whiff of something earthy, forbidden, and your imagination takes care of the rest. As Michel Foucault once teased in his meditations on the history of sexuality, sometimes the belief in desire matters more than the reality of it. Your fingers brush a basket of tiny cloth bundles tied with crimson thread. A passing pilgrim explains that these sachets, filled with saffron, myrrh, and a pinch of salt, were carried by brides for luck. Quirky, yes, but also serious enough that brides who forgot them were sometimes whispered to be cursed. The irony, of course, is that salt was valuable precisely because it preserved meat, yet here it was asked to preserve affection. You can't help but smirk at the idea of a husband being treated like a side of lamb, his fidelity kept fresh with a pinch of spice. The night deepens, the moon silvering the dunes beyond the market, and you imagine caravans loaded with these charms crossing. Weeks of sand. Did they work? Probably not. But here's the thing. You carry them anyway, because hope weighs less than doubt, and superstition folds more neatly into a saddlebag than despair. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we laughed at in another story? This is its cousin absurd. Sure, but also deeply human. People don't gamble on charms because they're certain. They gamble because the alternative is silence, distance, rejection. Somewhere in the crowd, you overhear a young man boasting about a potion he slipped into. His sweetheart's drink, a drop of cardamom, a pinch of nutmeg, stirred with honey. He swears she fell in love that night. You cringe at the ethics, of course, but the tale echoes recipes that appear again and again in old manuscripts, hinting at how blurred the line was between love, magic, and manipulation. Historians still argue whether these were acts of devotion or quiet coercion. You walk on, the air heavier now, realizing the Silk Road didn't just trade silk and spice. It traded in longing, fear, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere might stay. So you keep moving, past the torchlight into the cool night, sachets rustling in your pocket, the scent of saffron trailing like an invisible leash. And you wonder, not for the first time, whether you believe in it, or whether it's simply easier to let the scent do the hoping for you. You follow the rustle of silk through a narrow alley where lanterns glow like fallen stars. And suddenly, you're standing before a bolt of fabric so smooth it almost shimmers in the air. The merchant handling it doesn't just sell cloth. He sells whispers. His hands glide across the embroidery where tiny stitches conceal little symbols, almost invisible unless the light hits just right: circles, knots, and curious little flowers. He tells you these are not just decorations but hidden charms sewn by women who believed each thread could bind desire or shield passion from wandering eyes. You can imagine a bride, nervous on her wedding night, clutching a robe lined with such stitches, trusting that the needle carried more than thread, it carried prayers, maybe even spells. A cheeky thought sneaks in: modern lovers might spend fortunes on diamonds, yet here it was, affection tucked into the seam of a hem. You recall a story from the Kama Sutra, where silk wasn't just about softness, but strategy. Clothing embroidered with certain knots was said to inflame the senses. Historians still argue whether these patterns were practical designs or coded messages, and the ambiguity makes it juicier. Imagine a lover receiving a scarf, the pattern of its stitches saying more than any spoken vow, the way a text message can carry meaning far heavier than its few words. The charm was not only in the fabric, but in the secrecy, in the idea that love might be protected if you simply carried the right cloth close to your skin. At another stall, you pause before tiny amulets shaped like lotus blossoms and tigers, cast from copper and painted with flecks of cinnabar red. The vendor insists they must be stitched into garments, hidden from sight but never from touch. He leans close and murmurs a story of a scholar's wife who slipped one into her husband's robe before he traveled. According to legend, he returned, untouched by temptation, swearing the women he met along the road seemed to blur and fade. A superstition, sure, but you can't help imagining that copper talisman glowing warm against his chest, a quiet anchor dragging his heart home. There's a quirkier detail you stumble across in an old Persian traveler's notes. Women certain provinces believed tying a scrap of silk around their thigh before bed would bring them vivid dreams of their future lover. It sounds absurd until you remember how even now, people slip crystals under pillows for the same effect. Some things never change, they just swap outfits. You smile at the image of a young woman, restless under the stars, knotting a ribbon, and drifting off, hoping to glimpse a stranger's face in her sleep. A group of Chinese traders nearby debate something animatedly, their voices rising above the hum of the market. A translator explains, they're arguing whether jade amulets carved into the shape of paired fish truly stoked fertility or were merely pretty trinkets. Historians still argue about this, too, whether jade carried inherent sexual symbolism, or whether merchants cleverly sold myths along with their wares. Either way, lovers bought them, because desire rarely bothers with logic. You pick one up, its surface cool against your palm, and imagine two young newlyweds clutching it like a lifeline, believing that smooth stone could cradle their future. As the night deepens, a procession of dancers sweeps past, their silk robes glinting under torchlight. One swirls close enough that you catch the faintest glimpse of embroidery stitched with golden thread. But what strikes you isn't the beauty, it's the faint smell of camphor seeping from the fabric. You remember reading in Asterisk the erotic spirit. Through history Asterisk that camphor was once thought to suppress desire, making it a favorite among ascetics. Here, though, it's reversed. Woven into silk linings in tiny doses, believed to keep passion alive but manageable, like a fire banked, just enough to last the night. You chuckle at the irony medieval couples, essentially experimenting with fabric chemistry, centuries before lab coats and clinical trials. And here's a tidbit that feels almost too modern. Travelers carried strips of silk soaked in rose oil, which they believed could revive desire after long, weary journeys. You imagine a merchant staggering into his tent after weeks on the road, smelling of dust and sweat, pulling out a crumpled scarf, pressing it to his face, and sighing as if love itself could be bottled. It's not far from a modern spritz of cologne before a date-different bottle, same hope. Walking further, you brush against a bolt of indigo silk embroidered with cranes. The tailor tells you cranes mate for life, so couples ordered these robes as if sewing monogamy directly into the seams. You can't resist laughing softly. Maybe it worked for the cranes, but whether it worked for humans, historians still argue. Yet in the candlelight, with the robe heavy in your hands, you feel that strange mix of skepticism and longing. It doesn't matter if it worked. What mattered was believing it could. And that belief stitched its way across continents, hidden in silks that rustled like secrets whenever the wind caught them. You drift deeper into the markets where the glow of oil lamps flickers across jars filled with strange brews, liquids, the color of autumn leaves, powders as dark as midnight, and roots twisted like clenched fists. The voices here are different, less playful haggling, more hushed promises. You step toward a Greek physician, his beard streaked with gray, his cloak lined with travel stains, and his hands busy grinding herbs into a paste that smells both sweet and bitter. He tells you this mixture, swallowed in honey, will banish impotence, though he admits with a wry grin that sometimes the potion works better on the imagination than on the body. You picture a nervous noble clutching the cup, lips trembling, not sure whether he's drinking medicine or hope itself. In Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, there's the story of a French monarch who consumed oysters by the dozens, convinced they were nature's own aphrodisiac. But when that failed, he turned to his physicians, who slipped him herbal concoctions that probably did nothing more than give him indigestion. Historians still argue whether these tonics had any real effect, or whether they simply calmed the mind enough for desire to return on its own. A vendor at the next stall pulls out a vial of pale green liquid that smells faintly of mint and pine. He calls it silphim, a legendary herb said to cure everything from coughs to unwanted pregnancies, though by this time in history it was nearly extinct. Some claimed it worked as a love potion, others as contraception, and still others as a spice. Imagine the desperation of lovers, hoarding the last stalks like contraband, grinding it into powders or boiling it into teas, convinced that this fragile plant held dominion over both desire and destiny. Quirky? Yes, but also tragic, because by the time traders were telling you about it, silphim was already gone, plucked from existence by human need. The Greek physician leans closer and tells you about Satyrian root, a plant shaped vaguely like male anatomy, believed to restore virility with almost comical certainty. You can't help smirking. If modern people giggle over bananas, imagine how medieval travelers reacted to roots that looked like exactly what they promised to enhance. In The History of Sexuality, Foucault muses on how power often lies in belief rather than proof, and this root was proof enough for many. One sip, one nibble, and a lover convinced themselves they were suddenly as tireless as the myths promised. Whether it worked was less important than the confidence it granted. A young apprentice nearby stirs a pot of thick, dark wine infused with rosemary, thyme, and peppercorns. He insists that drinking it before bed ensures wild dreams of lovers, both known and unknown. It's easy to laugh until you realize people today still chase dream supplements with the same wide-eyed hope. The human brain has always been a theater for desire, and these old brews were tickets sold at the market gate. You picture a traveler slipping the cup to his lips, eyes closed, silently bargaining with the gods for a dream vivid enough to carry him through the loneliness of the road. One tale trickles down the aisle, passed like gossip. A wealthy Roman matron slipped her lover a potion of honey and crushed anise, and he swore he could never stray again. A sweet story, literally, but also a reminder that sometimes love potions were little more than dessert disguised as sorcery. You can't resist laughing at the thought that perhaps the real charm wasn't the herbs, but the fact she cared enough to prepare it for him. Historians still argue whether such potions were sincere acts of devotion or manipulative tricks, and maybe the truth is both. But there's a darker note lingering in the air. Some physicians carried powders of ground cantharides, also known as Spanish fly, believed to rouse desire but more often poisoning those who dared try it. Quirky fringe medicine at its deadliest. Imagine a lover offering this glittering green powder, swearing it would ignite passion, only to watch their partner double over in agony. You shake your head at the recklessness, and yet you understand the desperation that drove people to risk it. After all, the fear of being unwanted is older than any kingdom. As you move away from the stalls, the smell of herbs clings to your clothes. A cocktail of cinnamon, anise, pepper, and musk. You realize you've been seduced not by the potions themselves, but by the stories woven around them. Each brew was less a recipe and more a narrative, a promise that love could be bottled, swallowed, controlled. And you can't help wondering, as the night air cools your skin, whether you too might carry a flask of something, just in case. Because the idea of leaving love entirely to chance feels scarier than sipping a bitter brew in the hope of tipping fate in your favor. You step away from the smoky stalls of the physicians, and suddenly the night air thins, carrying with it the deep, steady drone of temple bells. Their echoes roll down carved stone stairways like distant thunder, and before you know it, you're standing at the threshold of an Indian sanctuary, where shadows of dancers stretch like liquid across sandstone walls. The carvings rise higher than your shoulders, gods and lovers intertwined in poses that make you blink twice, their bodies frozen. In eternal embrace, their eyes cast down with the calmness of eternity. The scent of sandalwood smoke coils through the pillars, sweet and resinous, clinging to your hair as if the temple itself wants to keep you inside. A priest approaches, his robe stained with turmeric, and he presses a string of beads into your hand. Rudraksha, he says, to be whispered over when passion needs balance. You feel the texture, hard and pitted, and suddenly the beads seem less like prayer tools and more like anchors meant to moor desire when it grows unruly. And just like that, you're hooked, because here, love isn't a matter of potions in dusty stalls, but a matter of sacred geometry carved in stone and sung in mantras that echo all the way to the marrow. The priest gestures toward a copper lamp, its flame steady despite the breeze, and tells you of a queen who once anointed her body with lotus oil before lying with her king. In the Kama Sutra, lotus oil is praised for heightening not only scent but sensation, a detail that makes you smile, because it's proof that people thousands of years ago obsessed over the same details as modern perfume ads. Historians still argue whether these practices were meant to elevate intimacy into the realm of divine union, or simply clever ways of making desire last longer in marriages arranged for politics rather than passion. You picture the queen, reclining under silken canopies, her skin gleaming with oil, her king perhaps oblivious to the cosmic philosophy, but not oblivious to her. In a side alcove, dancers spin in slow circles, anklets chiming, their arms raised like vines twining toward heaven. Their robes glimmer with tiny bells sewn into hems, and the rhythm of their feet matches the rhythm of the drums. Someone whispers that these were not merely dances but invocations, each step a plea for fertility or pleasure, or the strength to keep a lover's eyes from wandering. You're tempted to laugh at the idea that choreography could tie down passion, but then you remember the last time a song lodged itself in your chest and refused to leave. Maybe the dancers knew exactly what they were doing. One quirkier tale slides into your ear from a traveling scholar's notes. A temple in the south kept a hidden chamber where lovers left offerings, bracelets, rings, even locks of hair, believing the gods would bless their nights. Some visitors scribbled names on clay tablets, the ancient version of carving initials into a tree. You chuckle, because suddenly the divine sounds suspiciously like a cosmic guestbook of crushes, proof that even in temples draped with solemnity, people wanted receipts for their feelings. The air grows warmer as you follow a corridor lined with frescoes of couples draped together beneath flowering trees. The guide whispers that one ritual involved braiding sandalwood beads with red thread, a charm worn secretly beneath clothing. According to Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History, such charms blurred the line between religion and superstition, reminding you that people rarely separate the sacred from the sensual as neatly as they claim. Historians still argue whether these bead threads were acts of devotion or acts of desperation. You hold one up, imagining a young wife tying it around her waist, heart pounding as if the gods themselves might be watching, judging, approving. Then, there's the story of a temple courtesan, famed for singing hymns that made nobles weep, who carried a vial of jasmine oil around her neck. When questioned, she said the oil wasn't for her lovers, but for herself. Its scent reminded her that even devotion deserved pleasure. You pause at that thought, because it feels both ancient and startlingly modern. The notion that rituals of love don't just bind others to you, they bind you to yourself. You smile quietly at the wisdom tucked into that jasmine vial, wondering if she knew her secret would outlive her songs. Outside, the night presses heavier, the air thick with incense, and you realize the temple isn't just a building but a breathing thing, humming with centuries of desire dressed in devotion. You walk away with the beads in your pocket, the smell of lotus oil clinging faintly to your skin, and the carvings burned into your mind like dreams you aren't sure you should confess. And somewhere behind you, the bells toll again, long and low, as if the gods are reminding you that passion, prayer, and superstition were never as separate as we pretend. The temple bells fade behind you, but their hum seems to follow your footsteps, until it melts into the pulse of another night, this one alive with the chatter of a Persian bazaar. The lamps here burn brighter, casting long shadows across stalls heaped with copper bowls, glass bottles, and rings that glitter like tiny captured suns. The air is thicker, spiced with cinnamon, saffron, and the sharp tang of metal polish. A jeweler waves you closer, his beard oiled and his eyes gleaming, and he slides a tray forward filled with bronze rings, etched in crescents, stars, and scorpions. He tells you these aren't decorations, they're bonds, charms forged to lock love in place. You slip one onto your finger, feel the cool weight of the metal, and for a second, it's as if the band squeezes tighter, a promise and a threat. You laugh nervously, but he only nods, as if he's seen this reaction before. He recounts a story of a sultan's concubine who commissioned a ring engraved with the phases of the moon. According to gossip preserved in Eleanor Herman's asterisk sex, with King's asterisk, the concubine insisted that wearing it bound her lover's gaze to her alone, as constant as the moon's return. Historians still argue whether the Sultan was truly bewitched or simply terrified of disappointing her. But either way, the tale spread until lovers across the bazaar copied the design. You turn the ring over and see the groove shimmering under. Lamplight, half believing, half scoffing, exactly as people must have done centuries ago. A man nearby hawks amulets shaped like tiny scorpions, their tails curled, their bodies hammered from copper. He swears they protect against betrayal, and though it sounds absurd, you recall how in the history of sexuality, Foucault described the way societies map power onto symbols. Perhaps the sting of the scorpion wasn't about venom, but about warning hurt. Me. and the gods will sting back. You picture a young woman slipping such an amulet into her husband's purse before a journey, smiling sweetly as she tells him to stay faithful. The amulet would clink against his coins with every step, a reminder that love could be both sweet and sharp. Further along, another vendor shows you silver coins stamped with paired birds. He explains that couples buried them under the threshold of their homes to ensure harmony. It's quirky, a little ridiculous, burying silver only to never see it again, but the symbolism lingers. You imagine walking across such a threshold every day, the invisible weight beneath your feet reminding you of a promise sealed in dirt. It's no different, really, from modern couples hiding anniversary notes in drawers, little tokens meant to hold love steady when life grows chaotic. The bazaar itself seems to pulse with stories. You overhear one about a merchant who fell hopelessly in love with a dancer. Unable to win her with gifts of silk, he purchased a ring etched with intertwining serpents. Legend says she wore it once and never left his side again. Was it magic? Historians still argue, but the ring survives in museum cases. Its design too striking to be forgotten. You can almost see her hand lifting it, slipping it on, the serpents twining around her finger as if whispering, "You are ours now." Quirkier still is a tidbit from a traveler's notebook describing how some men in Persia carried small mirrors framed in copper, believing that if they gazed into them before meeting a lover, the reflection would make them irresistible. You smirk at the image of men primping in lamplight, clutching talismanic mirrors no bigger than a palm. It sounds laughable, but then again, how different is it from modern filters and selfies, each promising to make desire bend toward you? The tools change, but the vanity is eternal. The night deepens, and you realize how loud the bazaar has become. Every stall a theater of promises. Rings that bind, amulets that sting, coins that bless, mirrors that seduce. You pick up one last talisman, a bronze band etched with nothing but a simple circle. The jeweler explains it symbolizes eternity, no beginning, no end. It's the most ordinary design of all, and yet it feels the heaviest, as if centuries of hope and fear have pressed themselves into its shape. You slip it back onto the tray, the sound of metal against metal ringing sharper than any bell, and you wonder whether people ever truly believed in these charms, or if they simply needed something to believe in. Either way, the bazaar hums on, its lights flickering like stars trapped in copper, each one a reminder that love, like metal, bends only as far as you're willing to hammer it. The bazaar's glitter fades behind you as the road opens into open steppe, a horizon of endless grass that ripples like the skin of a sleeping beast. The wind here is sharp, whistling through the tall reeds, and the stars above seem close enough to snag on your hair. You stumble upon a camp of nomads, their felt tents glowing orange from the fires within, their horses stamping impatiently, their riders wrapped in heavy cloaks smelling of leather and smoke. A woman waves you in, and you notice something curious: bundles of braided horsehair hanging from the poles of the tent, some tied with knots so tight you can't imagine prying them loose. She laughs at your puzzled expression and explains, "These are charms, woven to keep fidelity safe while men ride far away for months on end." You picture a wife's hands braiding in silence, each knot a prayer, each twist of hair an attempt to lash her husband's wandering heart to the hearth. It's at once touching and desperate, the kind of act you can't dismiss even as you smile at its simplicity. The elder of the camp tells you a story of a chieftain who carried such knots on his saddle, swearing they made his wife's face appear in his dreams every night. You can almost hear his laughter, half earnest, half fearful, as if he didn't entirely trust that the knots were powerless. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman describes monarchs who carried tokens of lovers sewn into clothing, talismans no less strange than horsehair braids. Historians still argue whether these rituals were superstition or simply a language of longing, a way to hold love close when geography tore people apart. You roll the rough braid between your fingers. Its texture prickly yet strangely warm, like a strand of memory that refuses to fray. A young rider boasts about a trick his grandmother taught him, if he tied a braid of horsehair beneath his saddle. Before battle, no rival could claim his beloved in his absence. You chuckle at the bravado, but the others nod solemnly, as if love itself marched alongside warriors, needing armor as much as flesh. The thought lingers, maybe battles aren't only fought with swords, but with the fear of being forgotten. And maybe the horsehair wasn't magic at all, but a reminder pressing against the rider's thigh with every gallop, whispering that someone was waiting. Then comes a quirkier tale told by a passing bard, who insists that braids hung over doorways also kept spirits from seducing sleepers. You tilt your head at that one, imagining a lonely ghost trying to slip inside only to get tangled in knotted horsehair like a fly in a web. It's comical, almost cartoonish, yet the laughter of the listeners is uneasy, suggesting that in the dark of the steppe, with wind moaning through the tents, the idea didn't feel so silly. Superstition often grows where silence is too vast, where fear needs something tangible to grip. Nearby, women squat by the fire, fingers deft as they weave strands of horse and yak hair into cords. One hums softly, a tune low and steady, and she tells you it is to seal the knots with intention. Her daughter giggles, tying her own tiny braid, claiming it will keep her crush from looking at anyone else during the next festival. You laugh with her, but the elder frowns, muttering that such games are dangerous, that desire bound too tightly can break. Historians still argue whether nomads truly believed the knots had power, or whether the act of tying them simply gave comfort. The way modern people grip photos or text messages to their chest as if they could shield them from absence. In asterisk, Erotic Spirit Through History asterisk, Peter Webb recounts how lovers across cultures created physical tokens to manage the intangible. And as you sit there by the firelight, you feel the truth of it. The braids swaying from the tent poles aren't just charms. They're the physical echo of fear, hope, and stubborn faith. You find yourself thinking of modern long-distance couples who wear matching bracelets, little threads of silicone or steel, talismans against loneliness that aren't so different from these braids swinging in the wind. The night deepens, the fire crackles low, and the nomads drift into sleep beneath furs, but the braids keep swaying gently, catching the starlight. You lie awake, staring at them, wondering if somewhere out on the plains, a rider feels the tug of an invisible cord around his heart. Perhaps he doesn't even know it, but each knot tied in a tent far away pulls him subtly homeward, like gravity, like fate, like love dressed up in horsehair. And as the wind sighs through the steppe, you realize you're no longer sure where superstition ends and where longing begins. The wind of the steppe fades into the distant hush of church bells, and before you realize it, you are trudging along a narrow cobblestone lane where pilgrims shuffle forward with candles dripping wax onto their fingers. Their eyes glimmer with the kind of weary faith that makes the night feel heavier than the cloaks on their backs. You follow them up a hill where a shrine gleams faintly, its walls covered with scraps of parchment scrawled with names, prayers, and oddly enough, little hearts. Inside, the air smells of beeswax, sweat, and damp stone, and you notice pilgrims trading small vials as if they were contraband. One vial holds dust, another a splinter of bone, another a few drops of water said to be holy. They press these tokens into each other's palms and whisper that if you tuck them under your pillow, they spark fertility, or at least vivid dreams of the lover you want most. You can't help smirking so much solemnity, and yet beneath it, the same restless hunger found in any bazaar. A friar tells you of a young noblewoman who carried a vial of saintly dust on her wedding night, swearing it ensured her womb would quicken. According to Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, there were queens who leaned on relics when the pressure to produce heirs grew unbearable, trusting bone splinters and sacred oils more than the very men beside them. Historians still argue whether Such relics were distributed sincerely by the church or simply sold as profitable illusions. But the stories linger because hope itself was the most expensive currency. You imagine that young bride, clutching her vial as tightly as her husband's hand, believing holiness might mingle with desire. The air grows stranger when you see pilgrims laughing softly as they exchange jokes about a relic said to grant fertility if held during moonlight. One man claims he left a bit of wax from a shrine candle under his bed, and his wife conceived twins. His neighbor rolls his eyes but admits he's tempted to try. It's quirky, yes, but also familiar. You think of modern miracle products peddled on late-night TV, each promising vitality or love, each bought half in jest, half in desperate faith. You notice a woman slip a tiny wooden cross into her bodice, murmuring a prayer not for children but for fidelity. It strikes you that even in the shadow of saints, desire had its own pew. Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History points out that sexuality was rarely absent from devotion, and you see it plain in the glow of those candles pilgrims, asking not only for salvation but for romance that didn't wander. Historians still argue whether these rituals represented genuine belief in divine intervention or whether they were socially sanctioned excuses to carry talismans of longing. Shrine Keeper recounts a tale of a knight who returned from crusade with a bone fragment said to belong to a martyr. He gave it to his wife, and legend says she conceived that very night. The crowd listening chuckles, but no one denies the possibility. You can picture that scene, the knight exhausted, armored with dust and sweat, handing over a relic like it was both apology and promise, the wife clutching it with trembling hope. Was it magic? Or simply relief that he had come home alive? Either way, the story persists, as though love and sainthood shared the same candle flame. One quirkier belief you overhear involves pilgrims placing drops of holy oil on their lips before kissing their lovers, convinced it sanctified passion. You grin at the image of medieval couples solemnly smearing themselves before a tryst, turning foreplay into liturgy. It sounds absurd, but the laughter of those who tell it is fond, not mocking. Faith, after all, often needs humor to survive its own weight. As you leave the shrine, the bells toll again, their sound rolling down the valley like a slow tide. You slip past pilgrims still trading relics, some wide-eyed, others skeptical, but all clutching something small and fragile, as if it might change their lives. You look down at your own palm where a woman pressed a crumb of wax into your hand. It's nothing really, a fleck that could vanish with a breath. And yet you close your fingers around it, unwilling to let go. Because in the end, what keeps? People trudging up hills, lighting candles, and trading bones isn't proof. It's the need to believe that love, desire, and hope might just be holy enough to last. The bells fade into silence as the road unwinds before you, and soon the clamor of pilgrims, bazaars, and nomads is replaced by a quieter sound, the low murmur of storytellers gathered at a caravanserai, their voices weaving through the torchlight like threads of smoke. You sink down among them, the air warm with the smell of roasting chickpeas and the faint perfume of jasmine clinging to travelers' robes. The stories tonight aren't about saints or kings, but about the tangled legacy of all the charms and superstitions you've seen along the silk routes. One man insists the sachets of saffron truly lured lovers from miles away, while another swears the silk amulets stitched with secret knots worked only if sewn by a virgin. A woman counters with tales of Greek physicians selling bitter brews that did little but sour the stomach, and a merchant adds that the horsehair braids of nomads kept no one faithful but at least gave the wives something to do in the cold evenings. Historians still argue whether these practices were genuine faiths or elaborate scams. But here, in the firelight, what matters isn't truth or trickery. It's that people believed enough to keep carrying them from desert to temple, from steppe to shrine. You remember the perfumes in the caravans, saffron and musk heavy enough to make poets swoon. And you think of the concubines who dusted themselves with cloves, swearing it bound their lovers' bodies as tightly as chains. Then the hidden amulets sewn into silk robes, talismans that whispered promises in thread only the wearer could feel. You recall the Greek physicians with their jars of silphium, long extinct, peddled as the cure for everything from infertility to lust, and the bittersweet memory of people grinding a plant into extinction for the sake of hope. Then the temples, vast sanctuaries where lotus oils and sandalwood beads turned passion into prayer, where dancers blurred the line between ritual and seduction. The bazaars, gleaming with bronze rings etched with scorpions and moons, the weight of metal promising eternity, or at least a few nights of fidelity. The nomads, braiding horsehair with fingers rough from wind, tying knots to bind hearts across endless plains. The pilgrims, swapping relics of bone and dust, laughing even as they tucked them beneath pillows in the hope of divine fertility. Each memory folds into the next like fabric layered in a chest, fragrant, worn, but never discarded. A scholar in the circle stirs the coals and muses aloud that maybe none of these charms mattered, that love has always been a storm too wild for knots, powders, or rings. Another replies that the charms weren't about controlling desire, but about soothing fear, the fear of being abandoned, forgotten, or unloved. You feel the truth of it settle in your chest like warm wine. Quirky though they seem, these relics of hope reveal a simple fact. People have always been willing to believe in almost anything if it meant keeping love close. One story drifts across the flames, softer than the rest. A traveler who carried a silk scarf soaked in rose oil, not for his lovers but for himself, because it reminded him of home. You realize then that charms weren't always about controlling others. Sometimes they were about steadying the heart that carried them. You think of the courtesan with her vial of jasmine oil, the knight with his bone fragment, the nomad girl giggling over her braid, and the queen gleaming with lotus oil. Each, in their own way, reaching for comfort in the face of uncertainty. And you can't help smiling, because haven't we all done the same, slipped on a bracelet, carried a photo, or sprayed a favorite perfume, not because it's magic, but because it makes the air feel less empty. The fire crackles lower, the stories fade, and the caravanserai sinks into drowsy silence. You lie back against the warm stone wall, staring at the stars stitched across the sky like charms sewn into silk. The night air cools, carrying the faintest sense of saffron and smoke, and you let yourself drift into the rhythm of ancient footsteps. Merchants, pilgrims, lovers, all carrying tokens of hope across the vast spine of the world. Whether they worked or not hardly matters. What matters is that for a moment, in the quiet between heartbeat and breath, you believe they could. And as your eyes grow heavy, you let the torchlight blur into gold smudges, the voices fall into lullabies, and the road of the silk roots folds itself into dream. Maybe the charms are still working, after all, not to bind lovers, not to conjure fertility, but to soothe the restless heart with stories that refuse to die. Now, breathe slowly, let your shoulders drop, and let the images of markets, temples, and star-swept plains soften at the edges. The air is calmer here, scented only faintly with the ghost of saffron and the cool whisper of night. The road narrows into nothing more than a thread, guiding you not toward another bazaar, but toward the quiet space inside your chest where stories settle into rest. Let the clamor of bells, the chatter of merchants, and the jingle of camel harnesses fade into stillness. Imagine the charms, beads, braids, rings slipping from your hands one by one, until only the warmth of belief remains. The fire burns low, the stars breathe gently, and you drift, not walking now but floating, safe and unhurried, into sleep. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.